Okay, children, here's your bedtime story. And here is the picture that tells you about where this is going on. This is the city of London in the 1300s. Can you see that? Let's see here. There you go. So that's what they call the River Thames. Thames. They always say River Thames. They don't say Thames River. And there's the little London Bridge going across. It was a huge bridge, actually. And that's what the buildings look like back then. And you see all the little ships, little boats on the river. Um, London was one of the first great cities in Europe. And this was before the time when they ever had horses or running water in your house. They had to bring water from the well and keep it in a pitcher. No electricity, no machines. Everything was made by hand. So now, close your eyes and relax. I'm going to read you the story of Laura and the Jewel Thieves. Long ago, in the misty city of London, lived a small girl and her father. They stayed together in a tiny house near the great London Bridge. Laura did not have much room to play. London was a very large city, but father said it was very dangerous. "I don't want my little Laura any farther away than the front porch," father would say. On the warm sunny days, Laura would play on the porch. She watched the people streaming over London Bridge. She wondered what they found on the other side of the great bridge. She wondered what so many people could do there. Laura would often pretend that she and her two dolls, Amy and Richard, walked over the bridge. What adventures they had! Sometimes she pretended that they found some money in the street, and then they would all buy sweet buns from a man who sold them from a three-wheeled cart. Laura's father crossed the bridge whenever he went to buy some leather for his workshop. He was a shoemaker, and many people believed that he made the finest shoes in all of London. Laura was very proud of her father. He worked long and carefully on the shoes he made. When he had used up all his leather and had to get some more, he would put his great warm hands on Laura's little shoulders and bend way down low and tell Laura very gently, "I'll only be gone a little while. Stay in the house and keep the door locked. If Amy and Richard get lonely, sing them a sweet lullaby." Soon Laura would hear the key tickling the lock, and then father himself would come tumbling in with his arms loaded with brand new leather. Even after they had put it away, the smell of the leather was all through the house. Nearby, a huge red sun was setting behind the lovely River Thames. Laura loved to sit with father while the sun disappeared. Sometimes father would tell her about what it was like when her mother was living. She could not remember mother, but father said that she was very beautiful and very kind. "She loved you very much," father said. "She used to sing you to sleep at night." When it was time for bed, father tucked Laura in very snugly and always said, "Little angels dream in heaven." From her pillow, Laura could see out the window all the way across the river to the gaily lighted windows of London town. she excuse me. She had heard people in father's workshop talk about the gala parties that the townspeople had after dark. She heard people say that they were going to royal balls where princes and dukes would be, and their shoes had to be the finest money could buy. Laura looked at the tiny sparkling lights and wondered what went on at those grand places. She could always hear father whistling in his workshop, and she pretended that she was dancing to his music at a party. Laura didn't know then that soon she would get a chance to see the places she wondered about so often. One morning Laura's father awoke her saying, "I have a big surprise for you. I'm going across London Bridge today and I'm going to take you with me." You're a big enough lass now to stay by me and not get lost." Laura was so excited that she gave Father a tight hug around his neck. He picked her up and lifted her high in the air. "Yes, I certainly think it's time that London saw my little Laura," he laughed. While Laura got dressed, Father told her that they were going to buy some leather, then they would stop by the butcher and get a good piece of meat for dinner. As they walked down the street towards the great London Bridge, Laura watched the people. Some were young, and some were so old that their faces were all wrinkled. She saw a little boy leading a lamb on a rope. She saw a blind beggar standing in front of a tavern. When they started to cross the bridge, Laura could see the other side not far away. They walked near the edge, and Laura looked at the River Thames below. The water was dark gray, and the boats seemed to be hardly moving at all. Laura was surprised to see that the streets on the other side of London Bridge looked just like her own streets. As she and Father walked along, Laura saw other children running and shouting in the street. She thought she would like to be friends with them. All of a sudden, there was a sharp crack. Dust was everywhere, and it stung her eyes. She could make out three men wearing hoods over their heads. Only their eyes were showing. They were on great gray horses. One man had a whip, one had a bright silver sword, and one had a bow and arrow, ready to shoot. "Laura," said Father, "run around that corner and hide in the alley. I will come and get you when it is safe. Hurry, run, and don't let anyone see you." Laura stood still. She was so frightened she couldn't move. "Be brave, little one," said Father. She ran towards the narrow alley just behind them, and around the corner she saw a wagon filled with straw. She ran up to it and climbed over the side. Inside the cart, the straw was scratchy and made noise every time she moved. She buried herself in the straw, except for her head, and crouched down perfectly still. Her heart was beating so hard that she was afraid someone would hear it. She heard the horses hitched to the front of the cart sneeze. Laura listened for her father's footsteps. She heard some horses go by. Then she heard some strange steps. They were light and very fast. They came closer and closer. They came right up to the wagon and stopped. "That couldn't be Father," thought Laura. "He would call me." Suddenly there was a crash on the straw like something had been thrown in the wagon. Laura jumped. There on the hay was a little brown and white dog. "Shh!" whispered Laura. "You can't make any noise." The little dog looked at her. His eyes sparkled and his tail wiggled. He crept up to her and sniffed her face. It tickled and made Laura laugh. Laura put her arms around the dog and held him close. "Now be quiet," she whispered. There were footsteps coming down the alley again. This time it sounded like Father. "At last," thought Laura. But they started running. They ran to the front of the wagon and climbed onto the driver's seat. "Hi-ya!" said a voice. The wagon jolted and started moving down the alley very fast. "Oh no," thought Laura, "now Father will never find me." The little dog licked Laura's chin. He looked like he was glad to have found her. "I wonder what your name is," thought Laura. The wagon rolled on and on. Laura could see through a crack in the side that she was outside London, in the woods. Back in the town, Father was searching everywhere for her. "Laura! Laura!" he called. He looked down all the streets and alleys, calling her. He asked people in the street and shopkeepers along the way if they had seen his little Laura. He began to walk more and more slowly and more sadly. Sometimes he thought he saw her and ran after her, only to find that it was some other little girl. Inside the cart, Laura was getting tired of sitting the same way for such a long time. She carefully moved toward the middle of the cart. The sides were very high, and the driver couldn't see into the wagon from where he sat. She felt a strange hard object under the hay. She felt all around. It was a large wooden box. It looked like a treasure chest. She tried to open it, but it was locked. The little dog sniffed all around the box. "Do you know what it is?" whispered Laura. He just looked at her with his sparkling eyes. "I'm going to call you Shiny because your eyes shine at me," she told him. His tail wiggled very fast and he snuggled up to her. The wagon stopped. Laura and Shiny hid in the corner. Laura looked through the crack and saw 3 men ride up. She gasped. They were the same 3 men that had caused the danger in the street. "Did anyone see ye?" one of them asked. "Nay, we got clean away," said the driver. "Come on, let's take a look at that loot." The driver got down and climbed the side of the wagon. He lifted the box and handed it to one of the men. "Whoa, what's this?" He reached down and lifted Laura out of the hay by her arm. "Where'd you come from, you little urchin?" The driver gave her arm a jolt as he said each word. "I didn't know the wagon was going to drive away," said Laura. "Well, you didn't belong in this cart, and you don't belong here," said the driver loudly. "What'll we do with her?" asked one of the men. "We'll take her with us to Canterbury and get rid of her there," said another. "We have to keep her now. She could get us caught in the twinkling of an eye." "But I have to go home. Father's looking for me," cried Laura. "Well, you'll be keeping company with us for a little while, dearie," said the man who carried the whip. Laura bent down and picked up Shiny. "Well, look, she's got a mutt, too." Shiny jumped down and gave the man a bark. "I don't think he likes us," said the man. "Aye, laddie, you're a smart one." The driver lifted Laura out, and the man who had carried the sword took her and sat her on his horse. They headed across a field toward a stone hut in the distance. At the door they all dismounted, went in, and sat around a rough-hewn wooden table. Laura stood in the corner with Shiny and watched the men open the box. "Aye, we'll get a good price for these in Canterbury. How much do you think old Chatley will give us?" "Should be worth 10,000 to the old swine." Laura was fascinated to see all the jewels in the box. There were necklaces, bracelets, rings, and brooches, all of them with beautiful jewels in them. That night Laura and Shiny slept on a blanket beside the wall. The men didn't go to bed. They drank ale and celebrated their riches all night long. In the morning Laura asked if she could go out and play. "Aye, get out if you want," said one of them. Laura ran out and stood at the edge of the road. "If I try to go home I might get lost," she told Shiny. "But if they take us to Canterbury, Father will never find us." "Oh, look! Someone is coming down the road." Laura thought hard for a moment. "I've got an idea. I'll give him the bow from my shoe and ask him to find the shoemaker in London who made that bow. Then he can tell Father where I am." Shiny wagged his tail. "All right, lassie, that's enough playing for a while," said one of the men. "Can't I stay out just a little longer?" asked Laura. He cracked his whip and roared, "No!" Laura came running in. From the window she watched the traveler come down the road. It was one of the king's soldiers. Oh, how he could have helped! As the soldier grew smaller and smaller in the distance, Laura wondered how she was ever going to get back home. She thought of Father, and a lump came to her throat. A tear rolled down her cheek and dropped from her chin. Shiny gave a tiny bark and sniffed her feet. Laura and Shiny spent the day sitting by the window watching the road. Laura hoped that somehow Father would come walking down the road, but all that she saw go by was a creaky gray coach pulled by four gleaming brown horses. When the sun went down, the men began to drink their ale and talk in loud voices. "Well, little lass, what do you think of all these fine jewels?" asked one of them. "I'll bet the little urchin never saw such riches as these," said another. "Who is going to get the money?" asked Laura. "Well, I did the thinking, but it was my bow and arrows kept those bloody men in their places." "Well, if I hadn't had the cart full of straw—" "You stupid swine, I'll—" "Your tongue wags a mite too much for my ears," said the driver, and threw his ale in the man's face. Suddenly all the men were fighting and throwing chairs at each other. Laura was so frightened that she ran outside. She stood for a moment behind a huge tree. Shiny ran towards the road. He stopped and looked at her with his eyes sparkling. He barked at her. Laura listened. There were loud voices and crashes inside the little house. Why, they didn't even know she had run outside. "All right, Shiny," she whispered. Laura ran down the road as fast as she could, and Shiny ran beside her. She ran and ran and ran until her legs were so tired that they ached. She was afraid to look behind her. Finally, she saw a wooden shack in the moonlight by the road. She ran inside and fell down on a pile of hay. She was so out of breath that she just laid there. Shiny was panting and jumping all over her. He licked her face and ears and then snuggled up to her. When she got up and peered out the window, everything was dark and quiet. She looked around her at the inside of the shack. Suddenly she gasped. There was a pair of eyes looking at her from the corner. "Are you running away too?" said a voice. "No," said Laura. "I'm trying to get home to my father. I got stolen by some men and I got away, and now I'm lost and I—" The lump came back in Laura's throat and she couldn't talk. Her cheeks felt hot and her eyes filled with tears. "What's your name?" asked the voice. "Laura," she sobbed. "Well, I'm Aaron. I've run away and I'll take care of you." He walked toward her. In the moonlight she could see that he was a tall, thin boy with brown eyes and brown hair that came down over his forehead. Aaron leaned over and petted Shiny. "Is he your dog?" he asked. "Well, I don't know," said Laura. "He likes me and I like him, and I hope he stays with me." "Here." Aaron handed her a handkerchief from his pocket. "Wipe your tears off. We can sleep here," he said. "But what if the men come?" asked Laura. Aaron thought for a moment. "Well," he said, "you sleep in the corner where the shadow will hide you. I'll sleep out here, and if they come, I'll tell them that I saw you running down the road with your little brown and white dog." Laura giggled with delight. "How clever you are," she said. Laura woke up with Shiny licking her face. The shack was filled with sunlight, and she could see a huge spider web in the ceiling. Aaron was sleeping on the floor with one arm over his eyes. Laura walked over him. Laura walked over to him and looked at him. "Maybe he will be my first friend," she thought. Shiny began to sniff Aaron's ears. "Hey," he said. He looked up and saw Laura. "I was thinking last night," he said slowly, "if we go home to my mother, she could help you find your way home." "But I thought you were running away," said Laura. "Well, I'll run away some other time," said Aaron. "Come on, let's go to my house." "Do you know the way?" asked Laura. "No," said Aaron, "but I can find out. My mother is a countess, and everyone knows where she lives. I'll just ask someone which way to go." As they walked along the road, they began to see fewer and fewer trees and more huts. Soon a man rode up on a short-legged, speckled horse. "Pardon, sir," shouted Aaron. "Can you tell me how to find the home of Countess Baxter?" The man was wearing a floppy brown hat. He smiled and said, "Just follow this road until you come to a well, then take the road that goes east." "Thank you," said Aaron. "Would you wee ones like a drink of water?" asked the man. "Oh, thank you," said Aaron and Laura at the same time. They both took a long drink from the man's canteen. They walked what seemed like hours. "Why did you run away, Aaron?" Laura asked. "Oh, my mother wouldn't let me stay up to watch the ball." "Do you have balls at your house?" she asked. "Yes, we do sometimes," said Aaron. "Oh, I would want to stay up too," she said. Finally they were in London, with the noisy streets crowded with people. "Well, this is my house," said Aaron. Laura was astonished. "Oh, Aaron, it's so beautiful," she said. "Come on, let's find Mother," said Aaron. They ran up the front steps and knocked on the door. It was opened by an old man. "Why, Master Aaron, you've come back," he said. "Where's Mother?" asked Aaron. "She's up in her room. She's been quite sad since you left, sir." "Come on, Laura," said Aaron. Laura ran after him up a long staircase and down a hallway. Aaron burst into his mother's room. "Aaron," she said. Laura looked at her sitting in an elegant green velvet chair by the window. She was plump and rosy and had big brown eyes, just like Aaron's. "Aaron, I didn't know where you were. I even had one of the king's soldiers sent out to look for you." "Mother, listen. This is Laura. She got stolen by some men, and we have to help her get back home again." Aaron and Laura told her the whole story while Shiny sat quietly wagging his tail against the floor. "Well, I'll bet your poor father is worried sick about you, little one," she said. "We'll have to find him as soon as we can. Why don't you go wash yourselves so you can have a tart before we go?" Aaron led Laura to a room with a large bowl filled with water. There were beautiful flowers painted on the side of the bowl, and Laura looked at them when she bent down to get some water in her hands. "Which room does your father stay in?" she asked. "My father is fighting in a war to defend the king," said Aaron. "He must be very brave," Laura said. They had tarts in the Countess's grand dining room. Laura looked at the sparkling crystal chandelier with all its candles. She ate in a hurry, for she was impatient to get home to father. She gave some to Shiny, too. So did Aaron. Finally the Countess was ready to leave. "I know where the shop is of the finest shoemaker in London," she said. They all climbed into her coach. It was dark, and Laura couldn't tell where she was. "Well, Laura, we're crossing London Bridge," said the Countess. Laura's heart was beating fast. She strained to see the small window in the darkness. She strained to see through the small window in the darkness. The carriage stopped, and Laura, Aaron, Shiny, and the Countess all scrambled to Laura's door. The Countess rang the bell. They waited. Finally, Laura's father opened a small hole in the door and said, "I'm sorry, I'm not making any—" "Father!" shouted Laura. "Laura!" He opened the door and threw out his arms. He held her close while she hugged his neck as tight as she could. "Laura, my little Laura, what happened to you? I thought you would never come home." He looked at the Countess and smiled gratefully. "Thank you for bringing my child home," he said. "How can I repay you?" "Gracious," said the Countess, "wait until you hear the tale." Laura told her father all that had happened and about Shiny and her new friend, Aaron. Then the countess said, "If you go and tell the king about Canterbury and that Chatley man, they might be able to catch those thieves and get the treasures back. Then you and Laura may well get a reward." Father picked Laura up and lifted her over his head. "Hear that? We could be given money because my little girl is so brave." Then he turned his head toward their guests. "Will the Countess and Aaron have something with us to celebrate?" "No, but thank you very much," said the Countess. "I have to be going." She and Father shook hands, and then Aaron and his mother were gone. The next day Laura and her father set out to tell the king about the robbers. When they came to the gate, Father said, "We have information about some robbers who have stolen jewels." The guard opened the gate and called for a soldier who let them into a great room with many mirrors. At the front of the room was a man wearing a long red robe. "Is it the king, Father?" asked Laura. "No, but he will tell the king for us." Father told the man about the thieves and their plans to go to Canterbury and sell the jewels to a man named Chatley. "This is very important information," said the man slowly. "We are very glad you have come. If we capture the robbers, you will be well rewarded." Laura was so excited that all she could do was squeeze Father's hand. "Thank you, my lord," he said. That evening Laura and Father sat together on the porch as the sun set on the Thames. Laura told Father more about her adventures. Shiny sat in her lap and dozed. Aaron visited her almost every day. They would play on the porch or watch Father working on his shoes. One day while they were on the porch, two of the king's soldiers rode up. "Is the shoemaker in?" one of them asked. "Yes," said Laura, "I'll get him." Father came out and stood looking up at them. "This is your reward from the king for information leading to the capture of 4 jewel thieves." One of the soldiers handed Father a round white sack. Father took it and bowed. The two men turned and rode away. The next day Aaron brought a little white note as he was smiling, and he was smiling strangely. "Laura, here, it's a surprise for you. Take it to your father and ask him to read it." Father opened the seal and read, "The Countess Baxter invites you to attend a ball given in honor of Laura." "Well, how about that, my little princess?" laughed Father. Laura was so excited she didn't know what to say. That night, after Father had tucked her in snugly, Laura looked out at her window across the river. Shiny lay on the bed asleep. She thought of the rough robbers. Then she thought of Aaron helping her to get home, and of his cheery mother, and the man with the big hat who had smiled and given Aaron and her a drink. "I guess there are kind people everywhere," she thought. "I guess you're never really alone." And she was asleep.